This is Remote Daily, your daily dose of inspiration.
You have been on this roller coaster ride now for a couple of months. What kind of advice would you give everybody out there who is looking for a job right now? What was maybe the most influential advice that you received for landing this new role? Was there one thing when you look back on this ride that you've been on where you say, that really changed things around for me?
Yeah. I would say one is be patient. I think one of, especially like the weeks after the layoffs happened, I was kind of panicking because it's like, well, I only have a set amount of time before my severance package is up. And what happens if, I have no income coming? How do I pay my bills? Like, how do I maintain my household? Like, how do I, do I have to tap into my savings? That was all really scary for me. But I knew that like finding the right role would take some time. It wouldn't happen overnight. I knew that like miracles don't happen in like a month's time. Job processes and interviews, that takes a lot of time. So I just had to give myself some grace and just remember to be patient before taking on my next role.
Oh, and it sounds so easy to say that, but of course you have to be patient every morning when you get up, every night when you go to bed, and every time you open an email or you send out an application. So, oof, that's huge. And Robin, I remember when we were putting together this job hour event and you invited Malaika, we were thinking, late March, is that going to be good timing? Is that going to be too late to host an event like that? We were really thinking, and now it's 3 months later. 3 months ago, we were sitting there thinking it might be too late to talk about it. It's still very much happening. Lyft, Deloitte, Amazon, Disney, Meta. Just over the last couple of days, these were the names of the companies that came up, all huge companies that entered a new layoff stage. So Robin, now that you have your new job, what does it feel like to be in there, but still have this very uncertain climate for tech and media out there?
Yeah. I mean, to some extent in media, it's always this environment. I think those of us in the media industry are acclimated to it at this point. It's a tough business. It's had a lot of change, a lot driven by these technology companies. So I think what's really interesting for me, and then I'm going to sort of answer this, is I think a lot of us were passionate about media, and the media translated those skills into tech where they are very valuable. And that was the growth. And it was just up, up, up. And so I think this is very disconcerting because it's like, oh, wait, this is now also happening in tech. And I think that has just been very scary and shocking and just discombobulating for a lot of this, for a lot of us who are kind of in both of these industries and walk that line. So I think it just feels to me like a period of time. And I just remember very distinctly back to 2008 when this was really just the financial crisis and all of us were going through it. And I think I have that experience to fall back on because I was working at that time. And I think for a lot of younger people, they haven't really gone through that. And so it will end. So I think I just, for me, it's like, okay, this is really hard. We will get through it. And, then we will see the next phase. And I do really think I'm just the eternal optimist here. I do think these moments where, especially when it's very experienced people who are getting laid off, what we've seen, people who've been at Google for 10 years, like people, who have just so much experience are out there, and they're going to make new things. And there's so much new technology right now. And I think that that's actually kind of exciting. So I think it's really hard, but I think that new things will come out of this. The tech industry will recover, media will evolve, as it always does, because we always need the news. It's not going anywhere. So yeah, I'm the eternal optimist, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for this hopeful message. And the number of LLC applications, registrations is going up dramatically. We will have in 2 weeks a session about the rise of the solopreneur, what that means. And so many people are now working on their own ideas, and it is encouraging despite of this at this moment. So thank you for, bringing optimism to the room. I wanted to ask Malaika about this grief journey, though, because I had this very powerful impression that you really opened everyone's eyes to the fact that when you lose your job, you start out on a journey through grief that, we all have heard the words, but maybe it's hard when you're in it to actually realize that those are phases of shock and disbelief, and then defense and acceptance and all these things that are happening. But for you right now, where are you on that grief journey? Because the last time I think we talked, you were still in it. And it was still, and I was so glad that you were able to talk about it. So I was wondering now, a few weeks later, where are you?
Yeah. I think I have started to enter more of the acceptance phase. I think the most difficult phase for me was working through my anger, and disappointment and hurt. And then I think the longest phase was probably just the depression and worrying phase. And I don't want to say that even though I've, kind of reached this acceptance phase that, I've completely moved past that grief. I think I'm still working through it, but I think reaching acceptance just essentially just means that I've accepted the situation as it is. I've learned from it, and I'm just ready to move on with my life. So.
Wow. Kudos to you. And let's not forget where you both were laid off from: Twitter. I think from everything that I learned working at Twitter before Elon, pre-Elon times, was a very cushioned workplace and a cushioned experience. There was lots of benefits. There was well pay in general. There were a lot of brilliant minds that gathered in this organization that wanted to be a part of it because of the values, because of the purpose, because of the culture there. So Robin, I was wondering, because you just said media continues to evolve, so does the work from media. What have been the biggest challenges for you getting out of that environment and transitioning from Twitter into other parts of the media world, transitioning out of this, I want to say, very cushioned experience to a new role?
I think it's a combination of a couple things that were difficult for me. I think the most difficult one was that I just loved Twitter. It was this app that was a community for me, and I'd been on it since 2008, and it had a lot of ups and downs. And when I joined, it was so exciting to me that I actually got to influence Twitter. Like, that was so cool. And I just was so excited whenever we would launch something and we'd see people using it. And I think, that was really hard. And I think you kind of opened up with this a little bit, that it is part of your identity. I think when you work at these giant companies that everyone knows and uses, there's a pride there, and especially in media, I mean, with Twitter. So there's just such pride there. And that was really hard to let go of. I do think what helped, is that because it was so public, I felt like everyone knew the story and I didn't have to explain it. And I do think there was a lot of sympathy there. So I think people got it, and that definitely helped. Like, I know others going through other layoffs and there's no coverage. It feels like no one cares, and you don't have this really big, tight community to support you. So I actually think that while Twitter was unique and difficult, that actually made it a lot easier because you just had a support system. And the other difficult thing was, I think just always the people. I think, and that probably even more so from my prior role at CrowdTangle and being there for 8 years. Like, I think just the difficulty of starting a new role and just that feeling of like, I have to start over again and like get to know people again and introduce myself and understand how everything works again, because I'd only been at Twitter a year. I was pretty new there. So that's just always hard when you start a new job, any job. And I think now I've been there for about 3 months and I'm getting into the thick of it, but I still have yet to meet a lot of them in person. And yeah, so I think maybe that was only 2, but I've been talking for a while. So I'll kick it back to you. Those two things are really difficult.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you there. And CrowdTangle, the startup that you mentioned, of course, you went through the acquisition, through that whole kind of experience. And so there was always a growth and sort of uphill, but very exciting path that you were on. And out of a sudden, boom, there's the cliff. And I also want to encourage anyone, if you have questions around this, maybe you just got laid off, maybe you are out there on the hunt already, maybe you are out there for a long time already, please put your questions in the chat so that our 2 leaders here in the room can respond to them. And Malaika, one thing I remember from you telling was that you did an audit of yourself. And I found that so impressive. So you were laid off, you left your role at Twitter, and then you sat down and you kind of like clarified or crystallized for yourself what were you willing to compromise on from this great company that you had to leave and what you weren't willing to compromise on. So just to understand, what are some of the things now where you say these are non-negotiable things for me, no matter what situation I'm in, no matter how bad things are, I'm not going to give up on this?
Yeah, I think right now there are 2 non-negotiables that I think, live with forever. The first is my base salary. So I'm very keenly aware that it honestly takes longer for Black workers to find jobs. And then when we do, we're often paid less than our white peers. And this pay gap is especially stark for Black women. And so I know my worth, I know my value, I know my skills, I know my experience, and I'm confident in that. And so moving forward, I'm just absolutely not going to take a pay cut or undersell myself just for the sake of just having a job, right? And the second is the flexibility to work remotely. So when I was going through the interview process, I was actually really surprised when I was talking to a lot of recruiters, because a lot of the positions that I applied to were listed as remote, but then when I get them on the phone, they'll say like, oh, well, we're actually shifting towards, a back to office kind of plan. And, ideally, would you be open to working 2 to 3 times a week in the office? And it was really difficult to explain to recruiters why I wasn't willing to budge on it. Like that was like a non-negotiable for me. And it wasn't until this was actually a few weeks ago, I actually stumbled upon a study that was conducted last year by the Center of Work-Life Law that looked at women of color who specifically worked in tech. And it essentially explained why a lot of women of color didn't want to return back into the office. And a lot of those reasons varied, right? It could be from kind of macro aggressions or just overt acts of like racism or sexism to kind of the smaller, more subtle things like having to monitor our behavior, the fear of being perceived as too Black or too loud or too aggressive, self-editing, and the fear of being presented or perceived as too intimidating or unapproachable, being mistaken for, an office admin or custodial staff, or having to code switch, or being extra conscious of what I'm wearing and how I'm speaking, and altering my appearance just to make the people around me feel comfortable. And after I read that study, I was like, I've experienced at least one of these reasons at least one time in a job that I've had previously. And so, yeah, I think that for me, working from home offers me that peace of mind and comfort that I don't have to be exposed to all of those situations on a daily. And so, again, having that flexibility to be able to work from home just gives me some respite from all that craziness that I might come across. So those are my two non-negotiables moving forward for sure.
Wow. And I mean, this whole return to office conversation is crazy what's going on right now. It's a huge power game, and it is corporate real estate, it is PR, and it is on the other side, people like you voting with their feet. There's no lobby for the people who don't want to go back to the office. There's a strong lobby for the other side. And I'm glad you were talking about this, but I also want to get to the questions in the audience. Malaika, you already received a lot of love here from Rashad, who said how important it is to go through the process that you both have been through. And Anne, who said it was amazing how you kind of stand by what you're really worth. And Rebecca and Elaine have asked questions. I'm going to start with Rebecca, who says, how in the world did you not take a lower level job for the short term? How did you get through that, saying no to what was offered to you, what was a lower salary? How were you able to say no? How did you help yourself get through that and balance that question? I'm going to wait for something that pays more versus I could take something now that pays less.
Yeah, that was hard. But I also had to, take into consideration, I have to pay for, electricity. I have to pay for food. And will I be able to maintain my current lifestyle by taking that pay cut? And oftentimes the answer was no. And sometimes there was actually a few instances where the offer I received was egregiously low, insultingly low. And those were instant, I don't even have to consider it, just absolutely no. I had a number, I had a figure, and I also did my research. I found similar positions that had that salary range, so I knew that it wasn't impossible. So when they weren't able to meet me, and when they would give me kind of the runaround and all these excuses, I was not going to budge on any of that. Again, because I will stand 10 toes down on that. I know what I'm worth. I know what my experience is worth. I know what my skills are worth, and I'm not willing to be underpaid or undersold just for the sake of, having a job for that. So
kudos to you. And Elaine was actually asking, and I just saw Robin, you unmuted yourself. Did I cut you off? Did you want to add something to Malaika?
Yeah, I was just going to say on that question, and you said this, Malaika, just now, but it is really important to do your research, because if you're staying in tech or, where you at, then maybe you could stay at that range. If you do go to a different industry, which I went back to media, I'm it's just not, the business models are very different. And so I did research around what my expectations could be if I did, go back to media. So I think that you do have to do that research and understand what the company is that you're talking to. They might be in a different range. And then that you really just have to you have to make the call. And for me, you know, this too, and I was just talking about this with someone yesterday. I think when I first lost my job, you know, you hear all these different tech industries that are kind of up and coming, like, oh, I'll go into climate tech, or like, maybe I should just go work for Amex, or maybe I should just go work at a bank. And what happened was I started networking, as you said, Elaine, like that is your best bet. Absolutely, hands down, to get a job. Talk to the people you know, talk to your network, try to find someone at the companies that you're interested in. And what happened is my network is media people. So I ended up having lots of conversations with people, you know, in this business, just and I landed a job that I'm really excited about and is a great fit, but I am not, you know, selling solar panels. I'm doing news like I've done for 20 years. So, you know, I think you also have to make the call of, is this really the best time for me to make an industry move? Or I know what I know how to do this job. Actually, I'm going to stick with this, and then I might have to reset my salary expectations based on what is normal for that industry. So that's what yeah.
Yes, and I guess because you said research, probably Glassdoor and platforms like that where you have access to actual salaries is a great resource. And that brings us to LinkedIn, because Elaine was asking, you know, the LinkedIn game. So you shared something about this in Job Hour, and I'm gonna ask you, Elaine, to head up our link there to Quartz, because Malaika and Robin were pointing out you need to get your keywords right on LinkedIn for your current role, or the role that you just left. You need the keywords right for the future role that you want to have, and you need all the skills and certificates you have on your LinkedIn, and you need to, even if it hurts, to add that green open to work badge, because that is how recruiters are actually going to find you. And we had a recruiter, Serena Bartolucci, in the room, who said, yes, this is exactly what we're looking for. This is how we filter. And if recruiters reach out to you and they land in your other mailbox, respond to them. The algorithm needs you to respond, because otherwise they might not be able to reach out to you again. So this is a few things about the LinkedIn game that we shared in that article. But Elaine was asking, what are other strategies to find roles? And Malaika, I remember you were saying community is really, really important. What were some communities that you were able to access that were not part of LinkedIn, where you found support, where you found help, where you found other roles that were open?
Yeah, there were a couple. Like, for one, there were several communities of former Tweeps who, you know, on LinkedIn, there was a community on Slack, and, you know, Tweeps who were successful enough to land jobs at other places were then, you know, trying to give back and, you know, saying like, hey, I work here, let me know if there's anything I could do as a referral, or posting open job postings. So I would say, like, you know, the immediate network of former Tweeps was one community that I tapped into. There was another community called ColorCom, which is an organization to support women of color in marketing and communications roles, that I also leveraged. I actually met a mentor through that network, and she was definitely really supportive throughout the entire process. Just so not only, you know, in terms of suggesting and recommending positions, but also just in terms of just providing advice and being available there. And then I also want to address one thing that Elaine mentioned. I think you said that you hear a lot that networking is the best way for landing a job. And I agree-ish. Because I think one thing for me, like, I didn't land my current job through networking. And then a lot of the phone calls and interviews that I did have during that kind of transition process also didn't come from networking. Essentially, I had people come to me, you know, I had recruiters contact me, I had hiring managers contact me. so I wanted to make myself essentially as searchable as possible. Like I want people to come to me and say like, hey, your skills are exactly what I'm looking for. Can we talk? So I think networking is one way to kind of go about finding a job, but I think also another effective way is to make sure that, you know, your LinkedIn is optimized, your resume is up to date, you're using those keywords to be discoverable, and people are also coming to you and looking for your skills as well.
Can I just add one thing on the LinkedIn? So I found LinkedIn is indispensable, obviously do all those things. One just suggestion that I would have that, and I wish I had done this myself and I didn't, is when you go in there, like try not to scroll every day.
Yes.
Because you can get sucked down a rabbit hole. It can be very emotionally distressing because you're seeing everyone else is also unemployed. And it's just,
Yeah.
I found it really, really difficult for me and emotionally. And it would kind of like ruin my day a lot of times. And so then after a while, I was like, I'm not looking at this. I'm going to hit the jobs. I'm going to set up the emails and just look through job listings. I'm going to answer any recruiters that are DMing me in chat. And I'm not going to doom scroll LinkedIn because, you know, actually, I think the doom scrolling has shifted from Twitter to LinkedIn.
I agree.
So,
Co-signing. Yes, absolutely. Co-signing that.
Instagram for adults, as it's sometimes called. It's just as horrible. Thank you for saying that. What I wondered is, we had a session with our dear friend Beth a few months back, where she talked about in the pandemic being able to uncouple her identity from her job after she was laid off. Do you both feel you're on that journey as well? And is that maybe how we can get to a healthier relationship with our work lives? 2 questions in one. Bad moderator job, but I'm gonna just throw it at you. What do you think?
I can start.
Yeah.
Okay. I think for those of us in the media business, journalists, I'm not a journalist. I haven't been a journalist for a very long time. But I think that is baked into my DNA, my career. I will always be a media person and consider myself a journalist in this business. And like, that is a huge part of my identity. Since I was 12, I wanted to work for 17 magazines and like, you know, went from there. So I think that I'll always have. And Twitter was like the pinnacle of that in a way, because it's like the media's AOL chat room. And so I had to kind of come a little bit down from that. But what I will say is that, yes, I think it's good to decouple it, the company specifically. And what I found even in the last really like week or so, I think being at this conference has really been helpful, because now I'm not introducing myself as from Facebook or from Twitter anymore. And in a very strange way, and I think I've literally just realized this the last couple of days, it's actually kind of a huge weight that I was carrying around on me, because when you're working for a company who's constantly in the news and constantly criticized that everybody knows about, you don't even realize how much it is weighing on you in the background. And that, I think, is a good thing. And I think I will take that forward of like trying to, yes, like decouple that a little bit. So I do think, you know, where you work, especially if I think you're passionate about it and you're, you know, in tech and in media, you're gonna be, it's gonna be part of your identity. And I think that should be a point of pride. But I do think that you can decouple it, I think, a little bit more than I had in the past. And I think that's a good thing. So yeah.
Like
I agree with that. The only thing I will add is that Yeah, I think I'm also making a conscious effort to um to set a boundary when things are outside of my current job scope, right? So, for example, when I was at Group 9 Media, I volunteered to lead um, a employee resource group for Black employees within the company. But that was a lot of work. It was a job within itself. And it was fulfilling work, but it wasn't adding to like my day-to-day stuff. It was actually adding more stress to, it was actually eating into my personal time. It was eating into my weekends, unfortunately. And even though I loved doing the work and an area that I was passionate about, I do think that I have to make sure that I'm not doing extra work outside of what I'm scoped to do. So just being conscious of just not taking on additional work and setting those boundaries early, so that I'm not overextending myself moving forward.
Wow. I wanted to take the opportunity to ask someone to join us on stage who is an old friend of Remote Dailies from almost day one, B, and a very experienced recruiter, and C, a people leader who also got laid off around the pandemic and was job searching for a long time. Deb, it's so great to have you here. And I'm just going to put you on the spot here to join us for a minute, because I would love to hear what you have to say about something you just posted in the chat. You said the older you get, the easier it is to do it. Is it really like, have you seen it really become easier in your life to go on this journey that we were just talking about?
Well, I just got laid off again.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
That's okay. The company that I was with was basically a tech media company. So like of all the things, it was everything. And I think that I realized, first of all, when it happened, I was kind of like, well, I get it. I understand what's going on with the business. I'm in recruiting. I've seen our jobs go from an average of 90 a week to 12. I have a huge global team that I'm leading, and I'm not surprised. And I knew that I had done a great job because I had been reviewed and given the highest rating in a year. So it wasn't personal to me when it happened. I mean, it was sad. I missed my team, but I realized that, and I'm old, like I'm going to be 60 next month, and it's scary in some ways, but it's also liberating in other ways because I can see it for what it is. I understand it. I know how to job search because I did it for 18 months in the pandemic when I was feeling so scared. And, I'm going to do exactly what you guys have been talking about. And I wish I had been that person, 20 years ago or 30 years ago or whatever, to be able to set my boundaries, know my worth, and not just take something to take something. But I do think over time, as you go through these experiences, because they're going to happen again, you will feel differently every time. And this time I just feel, listen, I do have to work. I can't retire yet, and I don't want to retire, but I don't feel as anxious about it. And I feel more, I understand myself, I know myself, and I'm going to figure it out based on those things. So it will happen again. It's like what you said, it's cyclical, and it's going to get better and it's going to get worse again. And I hope the next time it gets worse, I'm out.
Wow. Amazing, Deb, that you're, just sharing this as it is. And I admire you so much. I remember the time when you were searching last time and how self-discipline and optimism never left you. And you're just amazing. You're such an example for how to do this. May I ask you, is there, like we just talked about the strategies, do you have a favorite strategy, Queen Deborah, as Sabine just coined you? That's your new name.
Well, I have to say, like, because I've been in HR and recruiting my entire career, and there's lots of strategies that work. I do believe that networking is the most effective. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to get that job that way. And I think it's great if people search you out. Like, I'm not somebody who gets searched out. for a variety of reasons, based on what I've done in the past. Like sometimes, like as many keywords as I put in, it doesn't usually work. However, I have had luck with LinkedIn, weirdly enough. Like it's not how the last job I had, I got through networking for sure. I had joined a senior HR networking group that got me new friends, as well as it ended up getting me a job. But I also got a job offer at the same time from Disney that I got through LinkedIn. So I think you have to do all of it, but I feel like to me, networking is the most important because you just never know where that connection is going to get you. And I have an interview set up next week because somebody that I networked with in 2020 introduced me to someone else who has a job board that is really great for recruiting. And he let me have access to it because she introduced me to him. And now I have an interview.
Mhm.
So you just don't know how it's going to happen. But always, you should be doing everything together. Like there shouldn't be this, or this. It should be everything. And then you just never know.
And what's that job board, Deb? Does it have a name or a URL?
It's an organization called Essex, and it's just for recruiting. Like it's just recruiting. The organization itself supports like blue chip companies in their recruiting efforts, and it helps them set up their internal recruiting. And so it's only recruiting that they have on there. And he said to me this time, he's like, listen, I'll give you access, but we have very few jobs because recruiting right now is like dead. Like nobody wants a recruiter because everybody's, nobody's hiring. So, but they had like 5 jobs posted, and one of them was something that made sense for me. And I figured, what the hell? And I reached out to the woman, and now I'm going to be speaking to her. So it's weird. And you have to know where to tap in, like you were saying, former Twitter folks,
But you also said something that came up in the job hour, that many recruiters actually got laid off, and recruiting departments have been heavily affected, which means that the data that you actually can access online is not always the most current one, because a lot of recruiting companies are smaller now and they can't even cope with what's coming in, what's going out. So you have to have these personal relationships in a way, and you have to talk to recruiters, because not every job they have on their list right now is available online, and you have to have these personal relationships. So thank you for that advice. And for closing today, I just wanted to first ask you, Deb, how can we support you? What are you looking for? Maybe somebody who's in the call right now can give a tip.
Well, what I've decided is I'm definitely going to have a side hustle this time. And one of the things I'm really interested in is coaching. I've done a lot of career coaching my entire career, executive coaching, career coaching, but working with college and masters and young people and helping them find their first jobs and do that kind of stuff is something like, it's like a personal passion for me. So if anybody has like a kid living in your basement who needs some help, reach out to me. Otherwise, I'm good.
You're the best. I just put your LinkedIn in the chat at Deborah Schwartzfarb. I highly recommend it. You are such a rock. You are a queen. I'll use that from now on. Your energy is super. Elaine just put in the chat. And thank you, Deb, for joining us spontaneously. And Malaika and Robin, what is something you would like to share with us before we part ways today? Do you have a final message or advice or announcement maybe, or resource to share with our community? Robin, I'm gonna start with you.
Oh no, don't start with me. Connect with me on LinkedIn for sure. I think I echo Deb. Reach out to, you never know. So even if it's not in the industry you're looking for, reach out to old friends you haven't talked to. I feel like it is a moment when people kind of come out of the woodwork, and maybe you have a little extra time to make those connections, and you just never know where things can lead. I wish I had spent a little more time just letting myself do that. obviously it's retrospective. You're going through it and you're like, oh, I'm just gonna lay in my bed in like a ball. But use the extra time that you have, because
Mhm.
that doesn't really last super long. So that's what I'll
Wow, deep advice here. Malaika, what would you like to share with us before we say goodbye?
Yeah. I will say one, identify your non-negotiables and stick with them. I think that will take you far and will help you find a role that really is fulfilling to you, not just something that is a placeholder for the time being. And then secondly, I would say, I know that, post layoffs, we normally post messages, especially on LinkedIn, that's like, if there's anything I can do, just please let me know. But I want to encourage you to actually reach out and help someone who's going through a layoff, like actively, because you have to understand that that person is literally in the depths of grief. They're overwhelmed, they're depressed, or they're anxious, and it's really hard for them to get back on their feet. So literally help them just put one foot in front of the other, help them update their resume, help them update their LinkedIn, help them introduce someone to your network, send them job listings that you think they're qualified for, help them take those active steps that they might have a little bit more difficulty doing post layoffs, and really just be that support system for them when you can. And yeah, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn if there's any additional advice I can do to help you, or support anyone. Happy to help.
Wow. Thank you, Malaika, and thank you, Robin. The links to you are in the chat at malaikanicolas.com, at Malaika Nicolas on Twitter, MN Strategist on Twitter, and Malaika Nicolas on LinkedIn. And I want to thank you both so very much for being so open to quote Cheryl here in the chat. Appreciate all the openness and sharing that you did. It's not easy to talk about this. It's very personal, even when it maybe shouldn't be. And you are such a great example. And I will definitely go to you whenever there is support needed for someone out there. And I encourage everyone to really reach out to Malaika and Robin and Deb when it comes to this situation. And I want to thank everyone who took the time today to be here. Goodbye. Auf Wiedersehen.